An exclusive interview with the Pope's right hand, what Cardinal Parolin said to Vice President Pence.
We talk about immigration, we talk about the defense of life, we talk about the religious freedom.
Pro-life battle. The Supreme Court announces it will hear a California appeal to regulate pro-life pregnancy centers. Deadly quake shakes Iran and Iraq, killing hundreds. The message the Holy Father is sending. And a helping hand. Pope Francis pays out of pocket with a personal donation to help the people of South Sudan. We'll have a report from Rome. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, November 13th, 2017.
At the Savior's command, informed by divine teaching, we dare to say.
The meeting of the U.S. bishops is underway in Baltimore. Yesterday, things kicked off with a mass celebrating 100 years of the USCCB. The Vatican's Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, served as the main celebrant. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. After welcoming bishops at the General Assembly in Baltimore, Cardinal Pietro Parolin joined Vice President Mike Pence to talk peace, policy, and protecting the lives of the unborn. White House correspondent Mark Irons was there and has an exclusive interview with the Vatican's #2 man. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Cardinal Parolin told me his meeting with Vice President Pence was fruitful. They discussed how to fight human suffering and protect religious liberty. And I asked Cardinal Parolin what kind of concerns he raised during his meeting here at the White House.
We raise a concern about the peace in the world. There are so many focus of tensions everywhere, starting from the Middle East, and then to go to the Korean Peninsula, and to Latin America, and then which are the action and the collaboration we can have just to try to bring peace and stability in many situations.
U.S. bishops have shown a lot of concern with this administration's policies, starting with immigration. Did you talk about immigration?
Of course, we talk about immigration, we talk about the defense of life, we talk about the religious freedom, the issue which are very important for the Holy See, and also we talk about migration, repeating the position of the Church, this compassionate approach, reasonable, a compassionate approach to the issue of migration.
Do you think this administration's policies on DACA have been compassionate?
No, I am not giving any judgment. We talk also about that, and the Vice President said there is a work going on that, hoping that it will be able to solve this problem, which is a real problem.
Again, that real problem that Parolin referred to is trying to find a fix for the young, undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers who were able to live and work in the U.S. under DACA, an Obama-era immigration program. President Trump terminated DACA and asked Congress to work on a solution for the hundreds of thousands of Dreamers still in the U.S. Lauren?
Mark, Mike Pence is President Trump's #2 man. Cardinal Parolin is the Pope's #2. What else came out of this very high-level meeting?
I learned they talked about humanitarian needs in Iraq and Syria among Christians and other minority communities there. The vice president praised the Vatican's attempts to restore democracy in Venezuela, and he also hopes the U.S. can work more closely with the Vatican to combat human trafficking.
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. The president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference denounces what he calls the forces of division within the country. He condemns U.S. immigration policies that divide families and calls for a humane approach to border security. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us from Baltimore, where the bishops are meeting. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, the president of the U.S. Bishops, did not mention President Trump or any lawmakers by name, but he's calling for a broad welcome for immigrants and refugees. At the annual meeting of bishops, Cardinal DiNardo and his brother bishops from across the country are affirming the government's right to protect national security, but they say the country should do it in a responsible way. The issue is a big one during this meeting, taking place on the 100th anniversary of the Bishops' Conference. This afternoon, the media asked Cardinal DiNardo whether or not the Catholic Church should provide sanctuary to immigrants who seek refuge in each diocese.
We have been always in favor of immigrants, refugees, and for immigrants, documented, undocumented, to have resources for our local churches, our dioceses, to be able to pursue policies we try to work out, sometimes in terms of legislatures or Congress, for the administration, but also resources that help people at the local
DiNardo
level.
also linked the church's position on immigration with the church's fight against abortion, saying respect for others begins in the womb. Also today, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York gave a presentation about the challenges to the pro-life movement. He talked specifically about the threats of abortion and euthanasia. He currently heads the Committee on Pro-Life Activities. Lauren?
Well, that's a good point. The bishops are going to be voting on who will succeed Cardinal Dolan as the next chair of the pro-life committee. Who is in the running for that position?
So, Lauren, currently in the running are two, Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago and Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City. Some see this as really a gauge, if you will, to figure out where the U.S. bishops fall on the issue of life. Cardinal Cupich has talked about the consistent ethic of life, in which he highlights the issue of not only abortion, but the issue of health care, as well as executions. On the other hand, more conservative Archbishop Naumann has talked specifically about the committee remaining more focused on abortion and euthanasia specifically. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from Baltimore. Thank you, Wyatt. The first day of this USCCB conference coincides with the feast of St. Francis Cabrini, who, ironically, is the patron saint of immigrants. Our next guest helps set immigration policy for the Bishops' Conference. Joining us now from Baltimore is Bishop Joe Vasquez of the Diocese of Austin, chairman of the Committee on Migration for USCCB. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
The Bishops' Conference is focused on immigration. Tell us about the Share the Journey campaign that the Pope put in place last month.
Yes, it was a great thing that the Holy Father wanted to do. He wanted to launch this Share the Journey campaign, which is about getting people to become more aware of the needs of our brothers and sisters who are immigrants, and particularly refugees. The Holy Father has made this a priority in his pontificate to highlight the importance of our brothers and sisters who are immigrants and migrants. And why is that? Because at the present time, there are 65 million people who've been displaced. Many people have had to flee their countries because of natural disasters, because of violence, because of terrorism. And so that has created a global impact. So we see all around the world a shifting of huge numbers of people. So we've seen that in the Middle East, in Europe, in Africa.
Here in the United States, the Trump administration released its immigration policy priorities, outlining objectives like border security, protecting the American taxpayer. But in response to that, you said that policy is not rooted in respect for human life and the dignity of the human person. How do we protect our borders, but at the same time show compassion?
And I think we can do both. I think, yes, we as a country, I think we have to take care of our borders. We can't simply open them up to anyone who would want to come here. I think that would not be wise. So we have to protect our borders. We have to especially keep out those who would seek to harm us in our own country, especially terrorists, those who are involved in human trafficking, anyone who would wish to do us harm. At the same time, we have to be compassionate with our brothers and sisters. The majority of those that are seeking entry into our own country are women and children. Those are the ones we've been particularly advocating for. The other thing is that our country, as you well know, was founded on immigrants. And what a great day today. We're celebrating the feast of St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, Mother Cabrini, who herself came here to our own country and then reached out to countless immigrants. So she saw the need, and she did it with a great passion, with a great sensitivity, pastoral care for people. So she reached out and did that. So it's most appropriate, I think, that today we're talking about immigration as we celebrate her feast day.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Certainly.
Bishop Joe Vasquez, chairman of the Committee for Migration at the USCCB. The Supreme Court is stepping into a fight over California's attempt to regulate pro-life crisis pregnancy centers. The justices today announcing they will hear an appeal from those centers who say a new state law forces them to promote abortion. Jason Calvi is at the Supreme Court with more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. That California law requires licensed pro-life pregnancy centers to share information with clients about abortion and other services. But those centers say the law violates their freedom of speech and religious liberty. I spoke to their lawyer today, and he tells me it's unconstitutional.
I mean, what we have in this case is the government forcing pro-life pregnancy centers, whose very identity, very goal, very mission, their religious beliefs at their core is to make sure that women choose life over abortion. Then you have the government stepping in and say, no, wait a minute, you have to tell each of these women where they can go get an abortion when you counsel them.
David Cortman represents a coalition of 135 pro-life centers in California involved in this case. He reminds the public the law was passed with the help of the pro-abortion group NARAL Pro-Choice California. It's the law's prime sponsor. The High Court will only review the free speech claim, not the center's complaint about religious freedom. And Lauren, the California law went into effect New Year's Day 2016. The case will be argued before the Supreme Court early next year, with a decision coming before the end of the term in June.
So while the California pro-life clinics, Jason, are waiting for this decision, what do they do?
Lauren, they face up to $500 in fines for the first offense. The pro-life clinics say the requirement mandating disclaimers forces them to get out of advertising. Think of those simple ads that say pregnant, need help. Under California law, those ads require a large 100-plus word disclaimer.
Jason Calvi at the Supreme Court. Thank you, Jason. President Trump picks a Health and Human Services Secretary. Alex Azar is former top executive in the pharmaceuticals and the government. He also was a law clerk for late Justice Antonin Scalia. The president says on Twitter, Azar will, quote, be a star for better health care and lower drug prices. An earthquake kills more than 400 near the Iran-Iraq border. The 7.3 magnitude earthquake also injured more than 6,000. The quake was centered outside the eastern Iraqi city of Halabja. It struck around 10 o'clock at night and could be felt 600 miles away on the Mediterranean coast. The Vatican issued a statement on the tragedy, saying, in part, that the Pope offers his prayers for the deceased and commends them to the mercy of the Almighty. And a 6.5 magnitude earthquake hits Costa Rica, killing 3 and sending hundreds more rushing outside. Electricity is knocked out in some areas, but officials say there is no major damage to infrastructure. A trial begins for dozens of suspects accused in last year's deadly attack on Istanbul's main airport. 46 defendants, all with alleged ties to the Islamic State, are on trial for murder and attempting to overthrow constitutional order, among other charges. The attack in June of 2016 killed 45 and injured 163, and the trial is taking place near Istanbul. Pope Francis meets with members of the Roman Curia, top Vatican leaders. The men are the heads of different Vatican departments. They advise the Holy Father on matters impacting the life of the Church. The meeting took place this morning in the Apostolic Palace. And Pope Francis is reaching out to the people of South Sudan with a personal donation worth nearly $30,000. The UN Food Agency confirmed today that more than 30,000 people will benefit from the help. South Sudan is in the midst of a bloody civil war and on the brink of a famine. Juliette Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. She joins us from Rome. Juliette, how will the Pope's donation of his personal money help the people of South Sudan?
Lauren, these are vegetable growing kits funded by a donation of almost $30,000 to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, and they're due to benefit around 5,000 families, which is more than 30,000 people if we think that every family is made up of about 6 people. Now, the kits will provide 7 fast-growing vegetable varieties to increase families' access to nutritious foods and to help bridge the food gap between the cereal harvests. It's a small, but it's a significant step in helping the people of South Sudan try to stand on their own 2 feet and grow their own food.
We had someone from the Sudan Relief Fund on the show last week, and he said U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, who visited South Sudan last week, didn't quite achieve objectives, and that food is often being used as a weapon of war. Can you give us an update on the conditions there in South Sudan?
Yeah, Lauren, almost 5 million people across the South Sudan are reported to be experiencing extreme food insecurity. And food experts are saying that the situation will likely deteriorate at the start of next year in 2018. So the kits and agricultural hand tools that are being donated in the area of Yei in central Equatoria, where fighting has caused many farmers lose their livelihood, is important. And an estimated 145,000 people there in central Equatoria are facing emergency levels of food insecurity. And that's a term that denotes a one step short of famine
right.
on the international hunger crisis scale. Yeah.
In addition to his private donation of $29,000, Pope Francis is showing his solidarity for South Sudan in other ways. Tell us about that.
Well, it's just been announced today that a prayer vigil is to be held in 10 days' time in St. Peter's Basilica for peace in South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, Archbishop Paul Gallagher will preside over the Mass, while Pope Francis has promised to send a video message and possibly even be there himself in person. Now, Pope Francis has mentioned more than once that he would like to visit war-torn Sudan.
Thank you so much for that update. Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, United Together. The First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs reopens for the first time since the deadly shooting. And the Roy Moore controversy. The Daily Caller's Vince Cullinase on the trouble for the Alabama Senate candidate.
E la porta viene chiusa. A mezzanotte viene annunciato l'arrivo dello sposo.
The Pope says to enter the kingdom of heaven, it's not enough to lead a life of faith. Christians also must be fueled by charity. Speaking at his weekly Angelus address in Sunday in Rome, the Holy Father says, quote, "A life that is poor in charity is devoid of true light." A Baptist church in Texas where 26 people were killed reopened on Sunday.
With 1,000 people at the service this morning, this church has been here nearly 100 years, and we set an attendance record this morning, so Satan did not win.
The former associate pastor adds that there are plans to build a new church nearby, but it's up to members to decide whether to demolish the current building. A second woman accuses Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore of sexual misconduct, throwing the Senate race into more turmoil. 2 women say Moore sexually assaulted them when they were in their teens in the 70s. Senators have called on Moore to quit the race, yet he calls the allegations a, quote, witch hunt and remains adamant that he won't drop out. Joining me now is Vince Cullinase, editorial director at the Daily Caller, host of Mornings on the Mall on WMAL Radio. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
This is rocking the political world here when this afternoon this woman spoke out. She is the first woman to come out on television and the first to allege that Moore forced himself and left bruises on her when she was 16. She came and gave a press conference right here, and I can give you a quote here. "Instead of answering my questions, he began groping me. I tried to open my car door. He locked it. He began squeezing my neck," and it goes on to say, "I was twisting and begging. I had tears running down my face." Does this dramatically change the political situation for Roy Moore?
Well, it's already had some effect here in Washington. Senator Cory Gardner, who heads the NRSC, has come out and and already condemned this and said that they're pulling support for Moore. He's the latest Republican now to unconditionally say that Moore should drop out of the race. Also, as a part of her evidence, and it's unusual here that we'd have something this concrete, but she claims she has a yearbook that was signed by Moore, and he signed it Roy Moore, comma, DA, which would have been district attorney at the time. He was about 30 years old at the time that this allegation took place.
Right, and it also said to a sweeter, it says, she said, to a sweeter, more beautiful girl. Now, this woman now is married and talked about this happening beginning when she was 15 and a student and worked at Hickory House, where he would come every night. Is it appropriate, do you believe, for anyone to invoke the Bible to politically justify this? And let me read you a quote from, this was from Jim Ziegler, the Alabama state auditor, who said to the Washington Examiner last week, take the Bible. Zechariah and Elizabeth, for instance. Zechariah was extremely old to marry Elizabeth, and they became the parents of John the Baptist. Also, take Joseph and Mary. Mary was a teenager and Joseph was an adult carpenter. They became parents of Jesus. There's nothing immoral or illegal here, maybe just a little bit unusual. Politically justifying Roy Moore, is that appropriate?
When you have to start going down the road of using the Bible to explain away a situation that involves a relationship with such disparate ages, especially when it involves a child, a teenager, then that's the wrong path. I mean, remember, Roy Moore here is not doing that. Roy Moore is flatly denying these things, but if his allies are coming out trying to justify it using biblical allusions, I don't think that does him any favors.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has come out and said, I believe the women. Does this provide political cover for Republicans to bail on Moore?
Not all Republicans, especially because Mitch McConnell's sort of a divisive figure. As much as he is the leader of the Senate, you're going to find that people who are considered the more establishment Republicans are going to find that they have some cover now that the majority leader has said this. Many of the people, though, that kind of see themselves as more in line with President Trump, you may see are going to withhold their judgment almost to a T. Republicans have at least said conditionally, if true, then Roy Moore should get out of this race.
Including Kellyanne Conway yesterday and including President Trump.
That's right.
Thank you so much. Vince Colonnese, editorial director at the Daily Caller.
Thank you.
Up next, the future of Catholicism. A new report shows a growing shift in followers. And a holy ride. The Pope blesses a man and his Vespa. Today we remember St. Frances Xavier Cabrini on her feast day. She was born in Italy but moved to the United States and founded the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Mother Cabrini was the first American citizen to be canonized. The makeup of Catholics around the world is shifting. A professor of history at Baylor University says the new demographics will change everything. Philip Jenkins predicts by 2050 the leading Catholic nations will be Africa, Asia, and Latin America. 100 years ago, Europe accounted for almost 2/3 of the world's Catholics. But by 2050, the proportion could fall to 1/6. Professor Jenkins says the Church's future lies in the global South. We are just days away from the beatification of Father Solanus Casey. It's taking place Saturday at Ford Field in downtown Detroit. Instead of footballs and cheerleaders and lions, the stadium will be packed with thousands of Catholics, friars, and priests. It's all to honor the life of the Capuchin priest who carried out much of his priestly ministry right there in Detroit. You can read more about the life of Father Solanus at National Catholic Register, ncregister.com. And you can see the Beatification Mass live Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern right here on EWTN. Beatification is the final step before becoming a saint. Finally tonight, get your motor running and head out to the Vatican.
Muchos kilómetros. Aquí llevo la moreneta.
Jose Antonio Fernandez is part of this Vespa Extremes charity project. He's traveling thousands of miles to bring medicine to children's hospitals in West Africa. But before he left, he wanted the Pope to bless the Vespa that he is going to be riding for 6,000 miles. And I think that's one of the things you have to say only in Italy. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.